1, 2, 3.
Practically, nothing. Chewing gum and like that. But that dropout rate really was high, and we couldn't understand it. So I said, well, I'll stick my nose in there. But it was a battle. Now they're, it's kind of a congenial group, really, they have on the school board. And it's kind of interesting.
You've got a couple of Indians on the school board recently.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we've had them on there. It was, about 10 years ago, a little longer, maybe, about 10. It was the first time we decided to kind of organize, and go to the school board. And they were going to have a caucus, so we were trying to get some of the Indian, on the board, and then, a couple of white people, kind of sympathetic toward the Indian people. So we just, quietly went around, and there'd be about maybe 7 or 8, white people would hold a caucus at the school, probably at 8 o'clock. And the first time we tried it, we got there, and it was about 5 after 8, and the caucus was over. And so we started campaigning, quietly. And so we got 24, people that we knew we could, definitely count on to vote for these, people. So we got up there, and here they beat us right on the floor. They said, everything's going to, go by parliamentary procedure. First you address the chair, and, we went through, like none of us ever heard of anything like that. So we decided we were going to abide by their rules. Mr. Chairman, about 10 white people over there. In the meantime, somebody let the cat out of the bag, see. And before, there was just eight people or so, would go hold the caucus up there. Here there was about 60 white people there, and there was just 24 of us. And so, first they said they had to cast their ballots for, 2 or 3 candidates for one, bring it down to 1. So they put 3 names up there, and they went on down, and we got voted out every time. So finally we had our last chance, one more position to be filled, so I scooted down the seats, and told them, don't vote for nobody else, just vote for this one man. And so we tried it. He got 24 votes, but the others, they still beat us. So then we got in on a write-in the next year. We couldn't get together, that quick,
Mm-hmm.
and agree on candidates and so forth, among all of the people. So we told them, went house to house. We told them what had happened at the caucus, the previous time. So the next year we got them in on a write-in. All the Indian people went. We typed the names out, on little slips and handed them. We went house to house again. So that's how they got in on the school board. But before that, we couldn't get our big toe in there anyway.
You had, what, 2 members out of
5.
Out of 5.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So that's, pretty good. And the new school board members are, understanding more so than before. They were just kind of biased, and they had served on the board for years, and so they weren't about to give an inch. So when their terms expired, well, then the Indian people even voted for some of the new white candidates that were on. But before that, they just, figured the Indian people were dumb. They didn't have, no logic or no reasoning powers or something. And so they had no business on any boards.
I understand that most of the money up there comes from the Johnson & Valley contract, doesn't it?
Yeah, quite a bit of it does. I forget how much it is. Per student, they get so much. And that's where it's possible, for them to have the hot lunch, program.
Mm-hmm.
But they go by the Indian students, that are in attendance, daily. They have to account for each child every day. And then it's on a kind of per capita basis that way.
There are more Indian students here than whites. So.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now, I want to ask you also, have they ever tried to introduce any kind of Indian studies? Something in social studies where the Indian culture is taught?
The new board, has kind of, talked about it. We talked about it before, but, we didn't make any headway at all. But now with the new school board, then we have these teacher corps, and they were quite interested in it. And then we had a man in art, and that's been, years since they had any art at all. But he introduced, a lot of the Indian art, the music too had this year. They had a program, and they had an Indian woman teach them an Indian lullaby, and so the students all learned it and sang it, and they're kind of introducing it gradually.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's really, and some of the students themselves, kind of disassociate themselves with their Indian culture. They've been, forbidden and stuff. Their parents too, when they went to the mission schools, they were forbidden to talk Indian or anything. So a lot of our people, like Henrietta we talked to,
Mm-hmm.
she doesn't really know too much of her Indian culture. And so it's kind of interesting, to see that the children do, want this type of education.
Mm-hmm.
When I was the director of this center, I had designated Thursday more because this Wilbur Sharback, he was one of the singers, and he was working at the hospital. And Wednesday and Thursday was his days off. And so Thursday, well, then we said we would designate that as Indian Day, and we could come in and do anything Indian, dance or learn the language, or they did a little of it. It was just kind of getting a good hold on. But through this Indian Day deal, well, then I worked with the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and we got funds to hire Dr. Howard out of Vermilion, James Howard, to come down and teach, the history of the Winnebago, to the people. And it was amazing, we never ever had less than 80 people there. Always, just that town hall was just full all the time. And he was real interesting. He had, about six sessions, I think. And they were all well attended, and the Indian people, that was the day, they shone around. And they brought all the food, everything, for the dance that night. And people would, kind of plan a menu, and then everybody brought a little something. Some would bring dessert, and some would bring meat dishes and like that, soup, whatever it was. Dr. Howard was real interesting, and then I, told him, I said, we don't want you to lecture, stand behind a podium or something, I said, just sit down and talk like Indian people did, and that's what he did, and it really worked out. And that's the type of instruction, like, we'd like to give the kids at school, but we haven't really found anybody that, well-versed in the Indian culture and so forth. And some of our own people, were approached and, to teach the language and how to write the Indian language. And so they might get that off the ground this fall, I don't know.
There's one remarkable thing about teaching in the school is that I tried this over on Prairie Island, and one of the best results was that they taught the white kids something about Indian culture. Really, they probably need education a lot worse than the Indian kids.
Yeah. And it was amazing to me, too, when Dr. Howard, was giving these, lectures, I guess you'd call it. Well, then, there was quite a few, the white people came. And the ones that came were the ones that surprised me, really, because I thought they were the ones who were least interested, really, from my experiences with them. And here they came, and faithfully there every time. But there's a lot of interest, when it's, taught in a proper way and in a kind of a, I don't know, always like a kind of dignified, way you can talk to them. And a lot of the Indian people, they like the kind of dignified way that Dr. Howard, talked about our people. And he, didn't pull no punches, and you know, quite often somebody will, you know, add a little color here and there and try to make it more, you know, colorful than it actually was. But he just, you know, told facts, and he told how they came down from Wisconsin, you know, to here. He gave that history, and then he gave a lot of, you know, like on their costumes and so forth, you know. A lot of our own people don't even know why they wear eagle feather and things like that. So he told, you know, what he had learned, you know, about our people, and he was quite well informed. I don't know what his source was, really, you know, other than the books there at Vermilion on this Paul, what was his name, Paul Radin. He had, you know, a lot of information that, you know, I hadn't ever seen, you know, before. So he evidently, you know, had talked with, you know, a lot of the older Indian people.
Well, he's lived this way for a long time. I know him fairly well. He's at Kansas State now. He's devoted his whole life. He raises 2 or 3 Indian children. His home. And it's amazing. I hear the same thing all over about him. He's traveled a lot. There are a couple of things I wanted to ask you about. One question that bothers me personally that I've never been talked about in history is how Indian people, after they got put on reservations, made their livings. And they talk about the culture and talk about government policy, but people have to live from day to day. And you said some things that would indicate that your parents used the basis of their life as a farm, wasn't it? About 160 acres. Now, what else did they do to supplement that, just to make it go?
Well, as far as the food, you know, Mother was, you know, a thrifty old girl. And she, you know, did a lot of canning and preserving, you know, from the garden. And then when fruits, you know, were in season around, there's blackberries and gooseberries and choke cherries and plums and strawberries, you know, when they were in season, well, then we went out and, you know, all of us. And Mom was, you know, pretty crafty the way she, you know, would finagle, you know, to get us to do more work than we thought we should be doing. But, you know, we seldom ever, you know, had candy and things like that. You know, like my kids now, they went a day without candy, it'd be like the end of the world or something. But out home, you know, we seldom ever had candy and, you know, then kind of little extras. And so she would stash some someplace. And then when it came berry picking time, whoever picked the most would get, you know, an extra piece of candy. We all got a piece, you know, but the one that picked the most would get the extra. And then after we got home, like the gooseberries, you had to stem the gooseberries, you know, so she'd put a bowl full in front of us, you know, just put it, and we had a big old blanket on the ground like that, and then she'd pour a bowl full, you know, in front of each one of us like that, and we had to sit there and stem them, and whoever got done first got the extra piece of candy. You know, she was pretty sly the way she used to work, and, you know, she made things fun, you know, for us. So we were working, but we didn't really realize it.
You said your father cut wood.
Yeah, they used to cut posts, he and Mom both, and sell them, you know. At the time they were getting hardly anything for them, you know. Locally here, you know, where there was, you know, closer to the, you might call it a market, well then they were, you know, getting less than 10 cents, but a little further out like Emerson and Homer, you know, surrounding towns, well they got, you know, 15 cents and like that. I think the most anybody ever got was about a quarter a post. And that was later, about in the 40s, you know, when the prices went up.
Yeah.
But, you know, then they had a horse and wagon, you know, to haul all of these. Then they would go clear down the timber there, and we lived about 8 miles west of town, so they would start off early in the morning, about 4 o'clock, and then they'd go down in the wagon and that would be about 15 miles in the wagon, and then they'd get down the timbers and cut all day and load up about dark and then start home. And then you know, they had a friend, you know, lived in town, but then they'd, you know, park the post there and then, you know, sell it from there. But my dad used to sell quite a bit of his, you know, out towards Emerson, you know, further west. So that was, that was the only industry really around here, where they got any money. And that was good money for the times, I guess.
For the 30s.
Yeah.
What about fishing and hunting? Any of that?
Oh, they do a little hunting, like, when I was younger, there was no deer around. There was mostly just, rabbits, small game, and pheasants and ducks. And they, some of the families did quite a bit of fishing. And then they would, take them down and sell them to the other families who didn't fish. But it's just been recently, really, that the deer came down here. They haven't always been here. When we were younger, we never saw a deer. We thought the only place that had deer was in Wisconsin. But just recently they came down, and they're quite plentiful, down there, and there's all that, timber, and you don't really see them, like out on the road once in a while you see them, but they're pretty gun shy now, and so they hide when they hear a car coming.
What caused people to move from the farms out there down to timber in the fall? I'm very curious about that.
Well, mostly it was, like I say, they could cut posts, and then in the winter time, then they, brought across on the ice, down the river. Then they would sell them in Salone, Salix. And then beside that, the firewood, was down there. And like I say, it's 15 miles to Emerson and Thurston, out that way, and that's where most of the farms were. And there's no timber or anything, they'd have to haul it.
So the average family would live out there and farm in the summer and then move over to timber and cut and sell to the east.
After harvest time.
Okay, another question that interests me about you is your concern for Indian culture. You seem to have more burning desire than anybody our age around here. The older people cling to this, but there aren't too many younger folks that do. I was wondering what inspired you to do this. Did your parents instill in you a desire to learn to speak Indian?
Well, we had to speak Indian, that's the only way we could communicate with my folks. And then, when we went to school, while I was, quite young, I could sense, the superiority or something, the white people, felt, over, Indian people, and I don't know, I just didn't like to be treated that way, really. And while I was quite small, I made up my mind, I was going to, learn and be as smart as the next one. And I started off pretty good. I graduated from high school. But at the time, they had no, programs or anything for Indian students, to go on to college unless you found some, church or somebody to sponsor you. Churches usually sponsored the ones, older than I am that, had college education. But it seemed like, while I was quite small, I stayed at the Reform Mission. My mother and father moved, back out on the farm. And it was still, during the school year, in the spring of the year, so they put us up to the mission, at the Reform Mission. There we were, like I say, we had to talk Indian at home. And then you saw other Indian kids, you just naturally, talked Indian. But there they'd whip you, if you didn't, speak English. And some of the children went to school up there, they couldn't, speak a word of English. And then they were, say, 10 years old, and they still, just starting school. And they would get whippings, for, talking Indian. And anything Indian, was, just, you were just, actually beaten for it. They used to have big, long rubber hose about, 2-3 feet long, and they'd whip these. And then they'd take these heavy, boards and crack them across the knuckles. And it was, it was a church, mission. And I suppose their religion, taught, the Dutch people, around the mission, that, it was a sin to dance. And so dancing, if they caught you even, going through the motion, like, making off, you were going to dance, or they thought you were going to dance, you'd get a whipping. And I always thought to myself, my folks danced, my grandmother, she gave away bundles of, material out, the Proud Grounds used to be across there at the time, the arena. And so I could dance, but then she gave, just yards of goods and blankets and everything away out there. And, so I could have the privilege of, dancing out there. And so to me it wasn't wrong, to dance.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't wrong to talk Indian. That's the only way I could talk to my grandma and them. So I just made up my mind I was going to talk Indian, and just recently too, we had camp director down at Walt Hill, and he had the ladies, the other ladies, that were working. I used to have, long hair, and I always wore it up, clear up high on my head like that. But he had the other ladies, they wore their hair down like this, and just tied in the back like that with a, barrette or something. And he told them they all had to go and get permanents, because their hair, didn't look white mannish enough for. And so the idiots went up there and got permanents, and one lady had beautiful long, just beautiful hair. She got it cut real short, and there she was all frizzed up, It made me mad, and I said, I'm going to go to work with pigtails, that's the way white men think of Indian women anyway. So I did. I went to work with pigtails. And he never said a word to me. And I think he knew why I was doing it. I didn't, have words with him or anything. But that's something that always, disturbed me even, as a child. And then, when I was in the 7th grade, again, Mother and them, we had to go back out on the farm. And so then they put us in the Catholic school. And we boarded up there and went to school, to the Catholic school. And I stayed there till I was in the 8th grade. And again, there, everything Indian was, forbidden. And I learned not too long ago the word exploit, And that, to me, is what they were doing to us even then. And I used to dance, like I said, my grandmother made me a buckskin dress, and my little sister and I. But they used us at the time to go to conventions and things. And my sister and I were the only ones, that brought our costumes, really, our, what we call them costumes, that was our dress and so forth then. But we went to the, St. Augustine out there. And the nuns and so forth, had speaking engagements here and there. And then they would go up and tell, how pitiful and everything, the Indian people were. And there was my sister and I, we had, memorized little speeches, to give. And it seems like that's where I, made up my mind, they weren't going to do that to us. Mm-hmm. They were just using us, really, The mission has done a lot of good, for homeless people, and like we weren't homeless, Mother and Father had the, farm out there, but there was no school and no buses at the time. So it was a, real good convenience, for them to put us up there. But the way they used us, to, go out and actually, I felt like begging for money. And the little speeches, I was just forced to, memorize them and read them, and I guess we were cute, and so the dollars rolled in. But to use, people like that, and that still, happens today, like the powwows, I like them, and I like to dance and everything, but more for my own pleasure. And I don't like they charge admission and everything. That's all right, they're willing to pay it and everything, but I don't like that exploiting part of it. If they come and enjoy, associating with Indian people, that's what I, would like to encourage. But
you were telling me about the difference between New Indian and Old Indian language the other day, and I'd like to make a record of that, because it's, I so often hear this complaint by older people, that they somehow can't convey the language they understand. Mm-hmm. And you said that the distinguishing characteristic was that in Old Indian had one word for large ideas.
That's really, difficult to explain, if you, like if I say the word, to translate it, it takes, I was just trying to think offhand, of one word that would, be a good illustration. Or like, you say, something scratched your windshield here. No, say the windshield wiper, moving back and forth, scratched the windshield. The old Indian way to say it would be, see, that means it kind of nicked up the, glass and scratched it really. But the way I said it, and until they corrected me, was, they scratched it, But I was talking English, Indian, and I said, Hingiduka kasiri. And that means, like, if you tear, material or paper or something like that. But there's a lot of words, like that. And, like, a string of cars down the highway. You would say, Hokuruch Serech. And that means just, like an automobile. It isn't alive, it isn't, an inanimate object,
Mm-hmm.
But they're all in a row. But then, the way we say it now, you say, in English you would say a whole line of cars. And that's the way I said it in Indian. But it's Hokuruch Serech, is the proper way. And I said Honihe Serech. That means, a large group.
Mm-hmm.
But Honihe Serech refers to some, like a flock of geese, or people, or dogs, or, some living thing. It's confusing, the English interpretation of, some of the things you try to say in Indian, and it isn't Indian at all. You're talking English Indian.
Yeah, that's it.
It's confusing, and it's quite difficult to explain.
It'd be very difficult to teach, too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If you're going to teach Indian, you'll probably be teaching the English version.
They asked me if I would, be interested in, I said I'd have to take a course myself first. But I do talk, real good Indian, I think.
Another thing that you've talked about from time to time is the problem of jobs here. And you said this industrial park that they're building is a possibility, but that has its problems too. One of them is sewer.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that this is going to get anywhere?
It's been a couple of years ago, was the first time, I would say in the history of Indian country, where more than one federal agency decided to talk to the Indian people, at one table.
Mm-hmm.
But there we had HUD and EDA and I think about seven different, federal agencies like that. And there we discussed, the sewage problem and the disposal problem and Winnebago water. And I think as a result of that, before the town was trying to, negotiate with different agencies, for a loan. And the tribe was trying to, and then public health was trying to, and the citizens, themselves in town, the town board, they were, negotiating with different agencies and, nobody got anywhere, the way, to my way of thinking. And I thought, well, why not pool all the agencies, the local ones that are wanting, better disposal plant and so forth, and the village board was up against it because for 5 years I think now we've been held in contempt because we did not have this disposal plant in town, and the state law I guess says a village our size must have a disposal plant, and we haven't been able to come up with any money, and the tax base is just about as high as it can possibly go in Winnebago. And there's so many other citizens, unable to pay taxes, and a lot of the Indian people, living in town are renting, and so the landlords don't pay their taxes because they're Indian people living in the homes, and it's kind of a sad state. The taxes, that's something else. But they, have no means, the village board itself, to come up with. They even had a 80% grants, but the other 20% they couldn't come up with, any funds at all. And so, I told you earlier, I was on the planning commission for the village, and this was one of the things, we had discussed there.